Imagine this. You're sitting in a cold, stone room. The air is heavy with the scent of fear and distrust. A ruler, perched on a grand but uncomfortable chair, gazes out from his fortress, scanning every corner, every shadow, convinced that somewhere, someone is plotting against him. This isn't paranoia. It's survival, or so he thinks. The walls, damp with the wear of years, echo with the footsteps of spies he himself ordered to watch over his people. Yet despite the fortress, the security, and the immense power, he feels utterly trapped. He's built the finest prisons for others, but now finds himself a prisoner of his own fears. This is Dionysius I of Syracuse, a tyrant who thought that controlling others was the path to security and power, but discovered that true power comes from within. This story isn't just ancient history. It's a living, breathing lesson about the dangers of seeking control over others instead of mastering yourself. Dionysius ruled Syracuse with an iron grip. He was a man who, from the outside, seemed to have everything. He controlled his city's every movement, watching citizens like a hawk watches prey, waiting for the slightest slip. He had eyes everywhere: spies, guards, informants. And yet, despite the layers of protection, he was consumed by fear. His paranoia was palpable, a heavy blanket smothering any chance of peace. You could almost taste the bitterness in the air around him, thick with suspicion. He ordered elaborate surveillance, built complex prisons, and ensured that every citizen knew he was watching. But, like trying to hold water in your fist, the tighter his grip, the more control slipped away. His focus on external power, on managing others, left him a hollow shell, physically alive, but mentally imprisoned. The air in his palace was stifling, filled with the whispers of betrayal that echoed in his mind. The paranoia consumed him, leaving him sleepless, haunted by the very structures he built for protection. It was as if every brick in those massive walls was a reminder of his failure to find peace within himself. And that's the real tragedy. He rejected Plato's teachings about self-governance, thinking that controlling others would fill the void inside. In the end, the only thing he truly controlled was his fear, and that fear consumed him. His life, surrounded by luxury and power, was like a feast of ashes, empty, tasteless, void of meaning. The harder he fought to control others, the more he lost control over himself, until the very power he wielded became his prison. And this is where we need to ask ourselves, how many of us are trying to control the people around us, thinking it will solve our problems? It's an illusion. Just like Dionysius, when we try to control others, we become prisoners of our own insecurities. We stop focusing on mastering ourselves, and we start micromanaging every detail of others' lives, hoping it will somehow bring us peace. It never does. Now let's shift to Alcibiades, another figure who perfectly illustrates the dangers of focusing on others before mastering oneself. Alcibiades was the kind of guy you'd love to hate. Handsome, charismatic, brilliant. He was a student of Socrates, a man with every advantage. And yet, despite the great philosopher's teachings, Alcibiades spent his life manipulating others to climb the political ladder. His charm was intoxicating. People flocked to him like moths to a flame, captivated by his boldness. You could practically feel the electricity in the air when he entered a room, his voice smooth and persuasive, like a serpent's whisper. But the thing about flames is they burn out, and Alcibiades was no different. The scent of ambition hung around him like expensive cologne, intoxicating but ultimately suffocating. He switched allegiances: Athens, Sparta, Persia, like a chameleon, thinking that manipulating others would bring him power. He thought he was playing the game, but in reality, the game was playing him. The slick, cold feel of the dagger in his hand, metaphorically speaking, didn't give him control. It gave him isolation. He became the guy nobody could trust, the man who would sell you out for the next big opportunity. And where did that leave him? Dead in exile, assassinated, his brilliance wasted, his potential snuffed out like a candle in the wind. Alcibiades teaches us that all the charm in the world, All the manipulation, all the attempts to manage other people mean nothing if you don't first govern yourself. He had the world at his feet, but lacked the internal discipline to handle it. He was the guy who thought if he could just move people around like chess pieces, he could win. But life isn't a chessboard, and people aren't pawns. They're not there to be controlled. And when you spend your energy manipulating others, instead of cultivating your own character, you end up alone, just like Alcibiades. This is where it hits home. How many of us spend our time trying to manipulate situations, to control how others see us, rather than building ourselves up from the inside? It's a dangerous game, and like Alcibiades, it leads to a hollow victory, if any victory at all. Critias was a man of deep intellect, educated in the highest circles of philosophy. But instead of using that knowledge to cultivate virtue, he twisted it to dominate others. He was part of the 30 tyrants who ruled Athens with cruelty and fear, and his downfall was almost poetic. Critias had the mind of a philosopher, but he lacked the heart. The sharpness of his intellect was like a blade, cutting through anything in his path, but it also severed him from the people he ruled. You could almost feel the cold calculation behind his every move, like a winter wind cutting through a thick cloak, leaving you shivering despite the layers. He thought he could govern Athens by sheer force, that by controlling others, he could maintain his grip on power. But just like Dionysius, he missed the critical lesson. Without self-control, external control is meaningless. Critias ruled with brutality, neglecting the very virtues philosophy had taught him. His regime fell apart within a year, collapsing under the weight of his own hubris. His body, once cloaked in power, now lay cold and lifeless on the battlefield, a victim of the very tyranny he created. His story is a warning to us all. Intellect without ethics is a dangerous weapon, one that cuts both ways. Critias's downfall wasn't just the result of a failed political strategy. It was the result of failing to master himself. He thought that controlling others would solidify his power. But in reality, it only exposed his weaknesses. And isn't that the case for so many of us? We try to control everything around us, thinking it will make us stronger, but it only highlights the cracks in our foundation. When you focus on ruling others, you end up losing control of the only thing that really matters: yourself. Finally, we have the lesser-known version of the Icarus myth, the one that focuses on Daedalus, the brilliant inventor and teacher. Daedalus was a genius, a man who could teach others to fly, but his fatal flaw was neglecting his own son. Imagine the scene: Daedalus, surrounded by students, basking in the glow of their success, while Icarus, his own flesh and blood, stood on the sidelines, yearning for his father's guidance. The scent of hot wax fills the air, as Daedalus, so absorbed in teaching others, fails to notice the growing danger his son faces. The heat of the sun, once a symbol of hope and achievement, becomes Icarus's downfall. The wings, brilliant in design but flawed in execution, melt away, and Icarus plunges into the sea, lost forever. The weight of Daedalus's failure isn't just physical, it's emotional, spiritual. He loses not only a son, but a part of himself. And what's the lesson here? You can spend your life teaching others, managing others, controlling others, but if you neglect those closest to you, if you neglect yourself, you will lose everything. The people we care about, the things we claim to value, they will slip through our fingers like sand, leaving us to wonder where it all went wrong. Daedalus teaches us that mastery over others means nothing if we haven't first mastered ourselves. You can give the world to your students, your colleagues, your followers, but if you fail to cultivate virtue within, if you fail to nurture those closest to you, your success is hollow. The loss of Icarus is a tragedy, not just because a young life was cut short, but because it was preventable. Daedalus had the knowledge, but he lacked the wisdom to apply it where it mattered most. Across these stories, one thing becomes clear: external control, no matter how powerful, is meaningless without internal mastery. Dionysius, Alcibiades, Critias, Daedalus, all of them sought to control the world around them, but in the end, they were undone by their failure to control themselves. And isn't that the lesson we all need to hear? It's so easy to think that managing others, controlling situations, will fix our problems. But the truth is, real power comes from within. It comes from mastering your own fears, your own desires, your own weaknesses. External control is fleeting, like a gust of wind. You may feel it brush against your face, but it slips away before you can grasp it. True control, lasting control, comes from self-discipline, from knowing yourself so deeply that no external force can shake you. Dionysius's paranoia, Alcibiades' manipulations, Critias's tyranny, and Daedalus's neglect all teach us one hard, unyielding truth. You cannot manage the world around you if you haven't first managed yourself. You can try to control people, try to bend them to your will, try to orchestrate every detail of your life, like a puppet master pulling strings. But in the end, you'll find that the strings lead back to you. And if you haven't worked on yourself, if you haven't cultivated virtue, if you haven't learned self-discipline, if you haven't developed the wisdom to know your own limits, you'll be the one tangled in the web you've created. So the next time you're tempted to fix someone else, to control a situation, to manage a relationship or a group dynamic, take a step back. Ask yourself, have I mastered myself? Am I applying the lessons of self-discipline, self-awareness, and self-control that these figures failed to learn? The greatest leaders throughout history have always been those who mastered themselves first. They led by example, not by force. They inspired others, not by manipulating them, but by showing the strength that comes from internal control. True power isn't about forcing others to bend to your will. It's about having the strength to bend yourself to your own principles. It's about mastering your own impulses, your own fears, your own desires, so that no matter what chaos is happening around you, you remain centered, grounded, and in control of the only thing that truly matters, yourself. Let that be the lesson from the tales of Dionysius, Alcibiades, Critias, and Daedalus. External power is temporary. Internal mastery is eternal. If you want real, lasting control in your life, stop trying to manage others. Start by managing yourself. Only then will you unlock the kind of power that no one can take away from you, the power of self-mastery.